This is video number 1 for my Nutrition 300 classes, the Dietary Fats Week. This is recording number 2 of number 1 because number 1 I didn't have my mouthpiece in place and it sounded like I was talking in a cave. We're going to eat some dietary fats in a cave, in Moria where the dwarves delved too deep. All right, so dietary fats are also called lipids. The primary type of fat that we eat is a triglyceride. A triglyceride is basically a molecule that has 4 parts, if you will. A top and then 3 legs. It's like a stool, seriously, like an old wooden stool that has 3 legs. And the legs can have different shapes. Those legs are called fatty acids, not fats. Fatty acids is the actual technical term. And the shape is the important part of this lecture because it gets to the shape of the fatty acid, the type of fat that you eat, and then the health properties of that fat. So when we talk about fat, we talk about the parent molecule. Here it is. I'm circling it. The triglyceride, which again is like a stool that has 3 legs, and those legs are called fatty acids. Fatty acids themselves are actually just kind of worth talking about because in actuality, even though we eat mostly triglycerides, what gets in the body is a disassembled triglyceride, and we disassemble it into fatty acids. And when we release fat from body fat, so during exercise, while we sleep, while we're sitting on a couch watching TV and we're using our fat for fuel, what gets released from fat are fatty acids. So fatty acids are pretty important. They're what muscles take up and burn for fuel, fatty acids. But the parent molecule is the triglyceride, and that's mostly what we eat. Triglycerides are fatty molecules. They dissolve in fat. They, like all the other fats in the stomach, they float on top of the gastric juice, right? That said, though, we also eat something called phospholipids. These are parent molecules that look like triglycerides, but are slightly different. Phospholipids aren't only fat soluble. They have a little bit of a fatty component to the molecule and a little bit of a watery component to the molecule. So phospholipids are the kind of molecule that does handshakes. It can hold on to something watery, like vinegar, hold on to something fatty, like olive oil, and if you add a phospholipid to those things, you make a vinaigrette. And it has different properties than, let's say, just oil and vinegar. And the last one, which is slightly indented, I'm not sure why it is indented, is cholesterol. Cholesterol is considered a fat or a lipid. It's a gigantic molecule. Its structure is insanely complicated. It is essential, but it is so essential we actually can make it. So why do we add it to the list? Why do we add it to this list? Because for those of you who do eat animal products, and that's really the bulk of people on the planet do eat animal products, then you're eating cholesterol. Because cholesterol is only found in animal tissue, milk, animal liquid stuff, whatever. So if you eat it, you'll use it. But if you're a vegan or vegetarian and you don't eat cholesterol, that's fine because it's so essential we make it. Here's a typical structure of fatty acids. These are drawn in the way they would draw fats in the olden days. This is a long chain of carbon. You see it's bent a little bit here. This is a fatty acid. It's just a long chain of carbon. Here's another one, a long chain of carbon. Add 3 of those together, put a cap on it, that's a triglyceride. So here's another summary of kind of all the fats we eat. I'll start at the bottom since we don't eat as much of this. Here's cholesterol. It's a very elaborate molecule. You can ignore the cystanol. That is a cholesterol-like product found in plants, which can actually be used to treat your blood bad cholesterol, which is kind of a completely different thing, but there's a purpose. There's a reason why it's on the slide. I'm not going to discuss it. So cholesterol is a pretty complex molecule. We make it in the liver. It's used to make things like vitamin D and estrogen and testosterone. It is essential, but if you eat it, it is essential, so we make it. But if you eat it, we will use it, but you don't have to eat it. The second kind of molecule that we don't eat in great abundance, like I said, was phospholipids. Phospholipids have these long chains. This is a long chain of carbon. This is kind of drawn cartoonishly. a long chain of carbon, and they call this a polar head. That just means it likes water. And so your standard phospholipid is used in things like creams and sauces, and I'll explain the way it works later. But the top is the bulk of your diet. Triglycerides, the parent molecule. Sucrose, maltose, and lactose are in many ways parent molecules to glucose, fructose, and galactose. We break down maltose, sucrose, and lactose, and we absorb fructose, glucose, and galactose. Well, this is the parent molecule. It has a head called glycerol, or stool cap, whatever you want to call it, and then 3 little legs called fatty acids. These fatty acids are really just chains of the element carbon, like a pearl necklace, and around the chain is a bunch of hydrogen. Sometimes they're straight. In this example, they're all straight. They don't have to be. They could be crooked. And we'll explain what that means and more about that when we get to it. And finally, what are the functions of fat in the body? I think for most people, we use it for energy. It's a storage form of energy. But I mean, it has other really important uses, though. And there's a reason why it's essential. There are some hormones that are made from fat, like estrogen and testosterone are made from cholesterol. There are other hormones which are not as well known, and they're actually made from dietary fatty acids that we have to eat, and they're essential for the way cells talk to other cells. Estrogen and testosterone is kind of like the sex glands, organs talking to the whole body, but cells do talk to neighboring cells, and those involved little hormones called paracrine factors, and those can be made from dietary fat. Insulating your body is a role for fat. Cushioning the body is a role for fat. Infants and newborns don't have a lot of muscle. Muscle generates heat. So the way infants maintain their body temperature is they have a lot of fat. And when an infant starts crawling and walking, they crash into all sorts of stuff. And you are thankful that your 1-year-old has a lot of body fat, because they fall in ways that are scary. And yet they get up crying and screaming, and they're completely healthy. Okay. And so you can look over this list, but those are the major key things for fat. Fat is essential. We do have to eat it. You can eat a low-fat diet. You don't need to, but you can. You just can't eat a no-fat diet.